talking about hunting in Wisconsin, the last thing that anybody who's consistently successful and knows what it takes to get it done using archery equipment is going to say is that it's easy, right? This is one of the toughest states in the country to get close and get a shot at big mature deer. When you think of over 500,000 annual gun hunters in the state of Wisconsin, the average farm being roughly 230 some acres, there's a lot of pressure that gets put on these deer. You know, they're either forced to wise up to the game or notch somebody's tag. And with deer collaring and being able to track the patterns and the habits of deer across the country, with a lot of these studies, they're showing that the average core buck range is anywhere from 600 to 1,200 acres. And when you're talking about an average farm in Wisconsin being 230 and all my farms being less than 100 acres, patterning these deer almost becomes impossible, right? You know, I like to call it quote unquote patterning because these deer move so far and they cover so much distance that, you know, you can find the overlaying habits and kind of the rituals and the tendencies going year to year. But to truly pattern a buck, you have to have hundreds, if not thousands of acres to truly know that that deer's not leaving and you know exactly what he's doing on a day-to-day basis. And I just don't think that's fathomable or possible for, you know, the majority of the average bow hunters out there. So even though I don't have the ability to control a lot of acreage, I don't have the ability to pattern and manage for, you know, giant deer, because of the fact that I am hunting less than 100 acres, I'm still a big believer that the more you put into something is equivalent to what you're gonna get out, right? So along with my brother and my dad, this has become a year-round process. We're always looking on what we can improve on, right? Where we can find that next stand location, where the screening cover is gonna be, where the timber stand improvement for this fall is gonna be taking place, right? And so we're always nitpicking and trying to, you know, level up year after year, even if it is a successful year, right? Because if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. So I'm always looking and striving to try to find that next best spot, add that next best improvement to the property to increase my odds. You know, and so this isn't just a hobby for us, right? This isn't casually hunting every other weekend or anything. This has become who we are. This has become our life almost, right? You know, some people play golf, some people play bar league softball. We hunt, right? We bow hunt, we manage and do whatever we can to improve this property, improve the properties that we hunt, to try to kill big deer in the fall. And that's our main goal behind it. And so I think one of the biggest advantages for anybody who's, you know, doing any sort of habitat work is being able to dictate where these deer are bedding, where these deer are feeding, how they're traveling, and all of that, how it revolves around how you're trying to hunt this property, right? So if you can understand that on any given day, there's probably half a dozen does bedding here, and there might be a buck here, there might be a couple bucks here, and then understand how they're likely to move according to the wind direction, according to the prevalent food sources at that time. So your entrance and your exit is safe. You're not destroying that bedding to food source movement. You understand that on any given day on this particular wind, there's probably a buck here, so I've got a potential to run into him in this stand location on his way to feed in this alfalfa or this green food plot, whatever it may be. That's one of the biggest advantages to setting up a property for hunting whitetails. So this is one of those farms where we have it set up where the food is high and then the bedding is low and on the steep bluffs. And what that allows us to do is have that top access and have that topography advantage when we're accessing those transition areas between bedding and food. And so all of this was put on display this year in October when I was able to slip in on bedding to food source movements, multiple hunts, and have great encounters with really nice bucks. You know, a lot of guys would be overjoyed to put a tag around a lot of these deer. And on October 15th, I slipped into a spot where it was kind of a new spot we hung roughly a month prior. And it was kind of a last-ditch effort to try to take advantage of some rut cruising that goes on historically in this location. I just decided on this big cold front night, you know, it was one of those nights where it drops 15 to 20 degrees from the previous couple days in the high temperatures. And those are always the days that I'm keying in on. Those are always the days I'm anticipating a lot of deer movement, because everybody knows that the colder that it is, the cooler it is, the better the deer feel and the more they want to get up and move. And especially, you know, in that early pre-rut stage of October 15th, there's a lot of bucks starting to feel their oats a little bit, right? You know, they're checking does. They're trying to, you know, figure out that hierarchy of breeding. You know, I had a couple young bucks, you know, feeling each other out, doing a little sparring in the cut beans. And what had happened is I had heard some branches breaking, and I could hear what sounded like a buck kind of thrashing his horns and scraping and pawing the ground. And I looked straight ahead of me, and sure enough, there's this 8-pointer that's kind of working through the food plot, and he's roughly 45, 50 yards at this point. And, you know, it's getting kind of towards that shooting light time. You know, I still had roughly 5 minutes left, but it's getting dark, right? And so this deer's working in, and he's taking his time. You know, everything looks bigger in that dark gray light. You know, you see those big white antlers, and you're thinking, okay, shooter. From what I could tell, he was at least 19 inches wide, but he had these real short tines. And so I didn't get a great look at his body. You know, it's crunch time. You got 5 minutes to shoot. You know, when he gets in range, you draw back and you kill him. And so that's kind of how the scenario played out. He worked in, quartering two, went broadside, and he's just feeding there. I draw back, but it's just too dark to shoot. You know, I can't make a good sound shot. I didn't feel comfortable. I couldn't see my pin well. And I'm like, it's early in the year. It's October 15th. I'm not going to force something on a good deer like this, right? And so fast forward to October 30th, and now we're in the heart of the pre-rut stages here, and we're just getting on the cusp of that peak rut, those first does coming into estrus, and these bucks are laying down a ton of sign, right? They're cruising, they're moving more in daylight, they're covering a lot of ground, they're looking for that first doe, but you don't have does that are receptive yet. You know, you might have one or two that's random, but in the grand scheme of things, a lot of these does are not ready yet, and the bucks are bothering the heck out of them, right? They're covering a lot of ground. The cameras are starting to light up, and the last week of October has always been my favorite time to hunt. I would say my encounters with mature deer in that last week of October compared to the first week in November is probably 5 to 1, 10 to 1, I don't know, it's big. I just have a lot more success getting close and having run-ins with these deer when they're not locked down, because that peak rut stage, that first week in November, can present its own set of challenges when you're dealing with bucks being locked down, right, for multiple days at a time. You don't know when they're going to be peeling off that next dose. You're dealing with a lot of dead hours in the stand. So I like to bank on that last week of October because I know that all the bucks are loose, right? They're all covering ground. They're all loose. I'm not in competition with an estrus doe at that time. So that's when calling can actually be really effective. And so I like to call. I love to call. And so that last week of October, I'm focusing on, you know, a lot of doe bedding areas. I'm focusing on a lot of doe food sources. Anywhere these bucks are going to be real prevalent looking for that first doe. And of course, they're not ready yet, but they're very susceptible to slipping up in daylight if the weather's right. And another thing, when it comes to that pre-rut stage in late October, these bucks are just now starting to shift their focus off their own safety and their own feeding patterns, and they're starting to shift that focus onto breeding. So a lot of guys say they go rut dumb. I wouldn't say in Wisconsin they go dumb, but they will do things that you can take advantage of if you are doing your homework in the off season. And so back to this hunt, up to this point, it's October 30th, the weather had been unseasonably warm and very dry. The food plots were struggling. We got a couple rains right after they were planted in late July, so they were okay, but they're really needing a shot of rain, so they don't have the draw and they're not getting the pull that typically they would have. October 30th is almost 70 degrees, unseasonably warm. Very bizarre weather. The cameras are pretty dead in the grand scheme of things, and what we're looking at is a massive rainstorm that's going to be pushing in the afternoon of October 30th, and then it's going to be raining all day, all night, and into the following morning of Halloween. 8 or 9, it's going to peter out. And so I'm looking at this like this is a massive opportunity for me to slip into an area that I know historically is a big buck killing spot. I could slip in there and I could get in there safe and effectively, and I could get in there quiet because I do have that rainstorm and I do have that heavy fog and those heavy winds that's going to conceal my access into the bedding area essentially. And so I'm having to go in 250, 300 yards into this steep bluff. It's very intrusive. These deer bed along this entire hillside, and I'm just looking for the right conditions to be able to slip in there and not blow the whole bedding area out. And so I slip into this bedding area stand Halloween morning, nice and early, under the cover of darkness, got all that fog, and it's still dripping rain, so I've got my rain gear on. And basically what this weather's doing is it's dropping in temperature all day long, right? And it's bottoming out in that upper 30-degree range. And so that's a massive change in the temperature. So I knew that as soon as this weather and this front pushes out, the chances of these deer getting up on their feet, especially in this late pre-rut stage, right? Anytime you have that weather that's locking these deer down and they're not moving, their senses aren't keen and they don't feel safe to move. Anytime you have those big weather fronts that roll out, you can expect that activity to spike dramatically. All right, I'm gonna knock this out before things get wild in here because it is perfect. Like I talked about in the video, we had this massive rainstorm roll in, about 1.5 inch came. It started yesterday late afternoon, all through the night and into this morning. It's about 7:30, 7:45 right now, and it's supposed to quit about 8, and then maybe a little bit of a shower towards 9. But for the most part, this rain is done. We've got temperatures dropping all day. It's about mid-50s right now, and we're looking at 40 degrees or 38 degrees by dark tonight. And to top everything off, it's Halloween, so I'm anticipating a crazy day. I'm back down in here in the chute. I sat all day in here about a week ago. 10 different bucks. It doesn't get much better than this, does it? A little bit of rain, cold, Halloween. Big bucks running. Let's see what happens. Stay with me. It's fairly calm on that location, and it didn't take long to have my first action of the morning. It's one of those situations down there where you're dealing with kind of some unpredictable wind, and you never know if it's you that's spooking deer or if it's something else. And I just kind of had the feeling that it wasn't probably me. I just had that feeling that, they were probably getting chased by a buck, and all of a sudden, right behind them as they're trotting into 10 yards, I've got this absolute stud of a 2-year-old. I can't remember if he was 10 or 11 points. I mean, just a beautiful deer. It was one of those things where I'm like, gosh, I don't think I can kill that deer without feeling guilty, just because of the potential that he has to do next year. And I had on and off movement all day long. I got a text from a buddy at like 3 p.m. He just shot a really nice 8-pointer. So I was convinced that this is one of those days that it could happen.
So basically, I was sitting here just kind of looking around, and I heard something that sounded like a grunt, but I didn't see anything, so I thought I might just be hearing things. And then all of a sudden I looked down, and I saw this doe kind of like take off a little bit, like run a few steps. So I pulled the binos up, and it was just that, just a couple does. And I kept looking behind him. 10, 15 seconds later, boom, that buck pops out.
I actually had a run-in with a deer I know pretty well. I've had a couple encounters with him previously. He's got a really messed up left side, and he's coming in, and he's on this doe at like 80 yards, and he's just not gonna leave her trail. I threw a couple calls at him, to no avail. And it's really hard to call deer off of, the physical thing. If they've got a doe, it's really, really hard to pull a deer off, a live doe. Shortly after those does and him rolled through, I catch a glimpse of something down below me again, kind of in that same general direction. And I pull up my binos, and I see this, really heavy 8-point. He's not anything crazy when it comes to antlers, but I'm looking at this deer and I'm like, man, that's a nice buck, right? But keep in mind that 2-year-old that I passed at 15 yards earlier that morning would have scored dramatically more than this deer. And so I'm looking at him, I'm like, I don't know if I can kill that deer even if I get a shot at him, just because of the fact that I passed a deer that's probably 20 inches bigger than him this morning. And all of a sudden I catch these does, and my heart just kind of sank, because what I need these deer to do is come on this old logging road. It's brushy, it's nasty, but these deer like to run it, and there's a massive trail on there. I can see multiple different rubs and scrapes along this old logging road. These deer love those things because it's just a little bit flatter and easier walking when you're dealing with steep bluffs like we are. And I couldn't believe it, because instead of following those does down into the thick, heavy cover where I was not going to get a shot, this deer reads the book for me. He's coming in, and I can see he gets on this logging road, and when he gets on this logging road, he's already at 40 yards, and I still, do not have my mind made up. I've got the camera on him, I've got my bow in hand, but I'm trying to figure out, is this a deer that I want to kill?
He smoked. He's gonna die.
Initially, I'm looking at this shot. I've got the Lumenok on. I'm thinking he's drilled. I see that height. It's perfect. It's buried in there. I got a perfect pass through. But initially, right after the shot, I know what a double lung deer looks like, and this just wasn't it, right? Those double lung deer, they're gonna tuck their tail and they're gonna just beeline it, and in 100 yards, they're dead. But this deer kind of, just kind of looked shocked, right? And so initially I'm a little bit hesitant. I know it's a good shot, I know it's mid-body, but it just might be a little bit back.
I couldn't let another one walk, dude. I got tomorrow on, and then I'm gone for 2 weeks. I'm like, no, that does not get old. I've passed so many deer the last week. Let's get this big camera rolling. I'm gonna fall out of the tree right now. My legs are gone. He's done. Goodness, I've killed bigger deer, but I have been witnessing all hell breaking loose here today. That's just a really, really, really nice 8-pointer. And he put on an absolute scene for me. I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. I'm a mess. I can't even look through my binos. I'm shaking so bad. Oh, he came in. And the 2 does he was following went low. And I was all pissed off because I'm like, if whatever's following, he's just going to take that same lower trail. And he didn't.
I'm confident that this deer's gonna die. I'm confident that it's a good shot, but I don't think that this deer's dead yet. I'm thinking, it's probably a straight liver. There's no sign of gut hit on there. So it's just back far enough to not get any lungs. And a lot of guys will say, 6 hours at least, 6 to 8 hours. But I'm of the thinking that, they're not gonna get any deader. And I've seen too many track jobs go south because of being impatient. I've never had a good outcome from being impatient on a questionable shot. So if there's ever a question in my mind, if I don't see that deer die, or I'm even slightly concerned about where that shot might be, I'm leaving them.
All right, it's just cracking daylight here, so it's the next morning, November 1. Gonna go pick up the trail here. It's just a little too far back for my liking, as far as the shot placement and kind of how he reacted. If there's ever a question with these deer, I always leave them, just because I've seen too many track jobs go south because of being impatient and pushing these deer, and you have no idea where they're going to end up after you bump them. So I think we made the right call. Basically, we're going to go to Shot Impact and pick up the trail from there. So here we go. Standing about right here. I think I got him right here. I'm gonna make sure. So I come down in here because I'm like, I left him overnight. Come down in here after daylight here. I get right to where I shot him. I can already see him. He didn't go anywhere, dude. Well, here he is. Talk about an absolute Wisconsin brute. This deer has a massive body. I don't know what he weighs, but he's big. He was still alive this morning. That just goes to show that you gotta be so careful
when you're tracking these big deer because they are so tough. They are so tough. I mean, this deer is hit for sure straight liver. He was sick this morning, but he still had life in him, and I ended up putting another one in him and ending everything, but absolute tank. The more I look at him, he could be 4 now. Good mass on him. Beautiful 8-point. I've been sitting in this spot that was my second full day sitting there. And I knew if I just kept grinding it out, that eventually I was going to get a shot at one because it's just too good. And it happened. And I could not be happier to wrap my tag around this Wisconsin hammer. I mean, just an absolute picture perfect hunt. Unbelievable.